By 2050, there will be 10 billion people on Earth. In 1987, there were 5 billion.
Tear down this wall.
That's right, the world population has nearly doubled since the first Predator movie came out. And more people means more food. Now, feeding 10 billion people, that's not just a challenge, it's something we've never done before. We're talking about a planet-sized buffet that needs constant refilling, where innovation and ideas must outpace our appetites, or we literally risk biting off more than we can chew.
What was wasted last year would have fed our armed forces. That's like throwing victory into the garbage can.
But we're the human race. We invented the wheel, we harnessed the power of fire, we turned corn from this flimsy thing into this gigantic yellow monster. We even grew potatoes in space. So although feeding all these people is going to be a challenge, if we learn more about the world of food, we can all make the choices we need to make sure this huge round buffet table never runs empty. This is Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.
And then what I really wanted to show you was in here. Let me see if I can find a light. Which is like the glamour shot of perennial grains. And when we bring people to campus, this is a great photo op because people can go down to the bottom, I'll do it, and show how, so this is the actual to scale image of the roots of a Kernza plant as compared to the scale of the roots of an annual wheat plant at its maximum depth. It's super inspiring, I think. And this image of these roots is, I think, a key way that humanity can relate to, again, natural ecosystems and the food that we eat. Yeah, and I'm 5'10", almost.
Meet Rachel Stroer, the president of the Land Institute and a driving force in sustainable agriculture. Since taking the reins from founder Wes Jackson, Rachel has brought fresh energy and forward-thinking ideas to this groundbreaking organization. With a deep respect for the Land Institute's legacy and a clear vision for the future, Rachel is leading the charge to create a more sustainable world. Today, we'll be sitting down to discuss Kernza, her journey to the big chair, and how perennial crops can help solve the problem of agriculture. So before I get to questions I haven't heard you answer yet, I want to get the ones out of the way that you've been asked a billion times, okay. 1,000,000,001 now. What is a perennial crop and why is it important?
Good question.
Thank you so much.
So a perennial crop, by our definition, is a crop that lives and produces food for 3 or more years. So that's the simple definition. An annual is what almost all of our agriculture is based on today. An annual is planted and produces once and dies or is killed off. It cannot produce more than one crop in its life. And so the idea there is that the perennial is persistent, it regrows year over year, and it eliminates what we think is sort of the root cause of most of the extractive, degrading nature of our current ag system, which is its annual nature. And a perennial planted just by its nature eliminates the need for a lot of the detrimental aspects of our ag system. It eliminates the need for tillage on an annual basis. It eliminates the need, ultimately, we hope, of chemical inputs. It reduces labor costs, it reduces diesel use and passes on a farm, saves soil, it regenerates soil rather than leaving it open for erosion and deterioration as in the annual system. So that's a long answer to what is the perennial.
I appreciate you answering. I know that's like part of your job title is just to explain that to people that don't get it. When did you take your current position as president of the organization? It was 3 years ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, three. In 2020, I became acting president, and in the end of 2020, in 2021, I became president. So
Okay, and then prior to
until
that, how long have you been here?
I've been here for a total of almost 10 years. I was hired in a sort of nebulous role to help launch a project that we had with a partner out of Denver, and then quickly got incorporated into the organization. Not long after coming here, Wes named me Chief Operating Officer, and I served in that role under Wes and then also under Fred Utsi. I then started working on strategy and became Chief Strategy Officer, helped the organization really develop our first strategic plan, which was adopted in 2020, and then became president acting, and then permanently so shortly thereafter.
So going from a nebulous role to now being in charge of the whole thing.
Not planned. This
Not
was
planned.
not planned.
So how did that kind of come to be, or is it just an organic process? What did you find particularly about the Land Institute that was so special to you, where you were like, yeah, okay, I can do this. I can take over?
Yeah. I mean, I felt like what is special about the Land Institute is what drew me to it in the first place, which is that this is an impossible task.
An impossible task.
Possible sort of transformative solution to the cascading social and ecological crises of our time, right? I've started referring to that as the polycrisis of the Anthropocene, right? Man. Because it just is, it's our food, it's necessary, it's sort of identifying that one or two characteristics of the current system that are so limiting, annuals grown in monoculture, and substituting it for something that nature has known for 4.5 billion years and has been developing and testing over that time. So I came to the work because it was so transformational and complex and challenging. And I think I was willing to lead it because I'm willing to deal with all that complexity, and it sounded like a fun challenge.
Yeah, definitely a challenge for sure. Yeah. I've seen you in other interviews, speeches, saying that you kind of have this sense of terror sometimes. Has that gotten better over the years?
I mean,
it's quite the task reshaping and rethinking agriculture.
Yeah. I think there's less terror. I've been I think when I first started in the position, there's a lot of angst about the importance of the mission and like having that on your shoulders, and was a lot. I think that's what was the most terrifying. And I think what I've realized, and really what our strategy is all about, is that we can't do it alone. Like, it is not all on my shoulders. It is not all on Lee DeHaan's shoulders. It is not on any of the scientists' shoulders. We have to be in it together, and we have to be in it with the hundreds of researchers that we work with, and we have to be in it with the farmers and the bakers and the millers and the brewers and the governments and the policymakers and thousands of scientists all over the world who eventually, we hope, will be working on this as the primary center of the future agriculture instead of what we are. So less terror.
The ultimate group project.
Yes, it is. So a movement is the ultimate group project.
Yeah, I can't, when I see, I mean, just the spread of y'all's work over the last 10 years, it's exponential. I mean, the crop you're developing in China right now, the rice, could you chat a bit about that and what the implications of that might be?
Yeah, sure. So again, and we have to be I want to be very clear that we are not necessarily developing it, but our partners at Yunnan University are most definitely developing a perennial rice. They have developed a perennial rice variety that I refer to often as, so if this idea of perennial polycultures is a moonshot idea, They have landed on the moon. They have arrived at where we want Kernza and sorghum and silphium and baki bean and dozens of other perennial grains to be in the next 20 or 30 years. They have produced a high yielding, equal to the annual counterpart, robustly perennial, grown over 4 years, 8 harvests out of 1 planting, perennial rice. And the paper in Nature Sustainability speaks to the economic benefits of that to the farmer, 50% reduction in inputs, 60% reduction in labor, the carbon sequestration benefits, the other ecological benefits based on the reduction in inputs, and other components of that system. And that's growing on a very small number of acres compared to global rice production. So the next step there is for the partners in Yunnan to do the work of testing it in different cropping systems, in different geographies, and seeing where all it might work. And then also other partners in other places in the world developing other varieties of perennial rice for their regions and cropping systems. We can come back through here if you want, but this is where the most living plants are. And so this is called the vernalization chamber, and this is probably perennial wheat and or Kernza. This is sandpoint here, and what they do is they put it in this chamber to simulate the seasons. So it thinks it's winter right now.
So cool.
The plants will overwinter, and then you can get more breeding information over the course of the year. So you're basically simulating a faster rotation of seasons here.
So how have you seen Kernza kind of take off, and when did that happen? Because in kind of researching the Land Institute and Kernza, I saw stuff from like even 5 years ago going like, well, we'll see what happens with that crop. And now it just seems to be taken as gospel, like, okay, it works. Let's try to do something with it. So when did that happen?
I mean, in the last 10 years, it's been a slow progress since that time. I mean, we laugh that it used to be whoever bothered Lee DeHaan, our lead Kernza breeder, the most about getting Kernza seed for recipes or experimentation won. And they got what, he would send them a few pounds here and there. And that started really in earnest about a decade ago. In 2016, Patagonia Provisions released its first beer. And then there's been interest on and off from various from the small baker, local cafe, to distilleries and breweries over the time. It's still not huge. And it hasn't grown up in the way that it will and that it needs to be successful at scale. I think Kernza is on less than 4,000 acres today, and is still sort of trying to find its way in the market and on farms. One of the key limiting factors is continuing to increase the yield so that we can get it to the point where it makes sense on even more acres and in more products.
So you mentioned it's on about 4,000 acres currently. Mm-hmm. Just 5 years ago, it was on like 400 acres, right?
Yes.
That's quite the growth then.
Yeah, it has grown substantially. And we've learned a lot, and we've had successes and failures over that time, for sure.
What stick out to you as some major successes and maybe a couple failures?
Yeah, I think, the success has been in the number of farmers growing it, the number of different products, all of the innovative chefs and makers who are coming up with new recipes that incorporate Kernza and other perennials. So those successes they seem small, but cumulatively they're significant. I hate to celebrate too much like the big brands that have incorporated it, but we have had General Mills with a cereal on Whole Foods shelves, the Patagonia with beer at the sort of same scale. So there's been some big players, but there's also been hundreds of small players doing important innovative work with it. So Yeah, I think those are the major successes. Challenges have just been what you would expect, probably from any completely new crop. Wes Jackson, I think, has a quote that the last new crop that we domesticated and incorporated into our society was 3,500 years ago. I'm pretty sure he's citing the blueberry with that statistic. And here we are with a totally new to us crop, which means we have to figure out how to cook it, how to process it, how to farm it, and all the while continuing to increase its crop characteristics in the breeding program. You're not going to ask this question probably, so like a good politician, I'm just going to answer it even
Please.
without you
Thank you.
asking it. So I think not only can this perennial ideology, theory, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, help us reconcile our animal, human, Homo sapien sapien connection to nature, and our biological needs through our biological needs of food and clean water and clean air, but can also help us reconcile our relationship with each other. Food is, and that's why I love that this solution happens to be around food. Food brings people together, it roots cultures, it roots people in place, it has historical value, it is like a remnant of deep time, both into the past and into the future. I think that especially because this is an election year in the United States of America, I have seen at the Land Institute, and I have seen around this food movement and food system transformation and food security that there is real bipartisan support for things like perennial grains, like agricultural reformation, like innovative solutions, like nature-based solutions, right? That's a word now. Like we talk about nature-based solutions for climate change, and it can be unifying, and it should be unifying. It shouldn't be the thing that tears us apart. It could be the thing that brings us together, just like food, just like your table, just like what you made, home brewer brews up some Kernza beer and invites their neighbors. And it doesn't matter who they're voting for. It doesn't matter, what their beliefs are. They know that they need nutrients and that this tastes good. And they can share in the things that we have in common. Guess what? We are all the same species. We're all Homo sapiens sapiens. We all require food. We all require clean water. If we can't agree on those things, something is very wrong with us.
Yeah.
But that's where I think it has potential. That's why perenniality is my solution to everything.
It's a pretty good solution when you think about it. Going to the cultural aspect of it, you're so right. Food is such a cultural thing that when a new product or an alternative many times does get introduced, there is quite a bit of pushback. Have you had to deal with any of that from like wheat farmers or the wheat industry now that there's, some type of thing that could be encroaching in on their territory?
I don't think that we're big enough for that. And ultimately, I think that the wheat lobby, the wheat associations, wheat farmers have a lot to gain from perennial wheat or perennial Kernza, crops that live in that realm of wheat in our diet. The yields of wheat are going down in Kansas. Climate change is not going to play well with annuals. It already isn't playing well with annuals, and the increased number of droughts. So my hope is that this isn't seen as something to fight against, but something to join with and help make the future of the wheat industry possible, the future of the corn industry possible with a perennial variety, the future of rice with a perennial variety, rather than something is like we're trying to put the wheat growers of the world out of business. No, we're trying to give them better tools that will actually sustain their enterprise and humans over the long term.
So you mentioned Kansas's declining wheat production. The winter wheat for this last season, I'm seeing numbers from about a quarter of it is graded to poor to very poor. Some things I've seen have seen up to a third of it. Obviously, drought and climate change has a huge role in that. Drought is only getting worse out here. It's getting more severe.
We were sweating today. It's October 10th.
Yeah.
And we were full on sweating.
Full on sweating. We washed our faces before sitting down in here. But Kernza can actually do quite well in drought, correct?
Yes. So like any plant, Kernza needs water and it needs sunlight. So, it's not going to survive the apocalypse.
Not like cockroaches or Twinkies
exactly.
or something like that.
Exactly. But we have found that it can, if the drought is at the right time, if it's established, it can survive the more dramatic dips in weather and climate that we're experiencing today. Not immune to drought, but certainly more resilient in the face of it. So the idea here is that we're looking at this prairie, and then when you look down yonder, you can see what looks right now a lot like tilled row crop agriculture. And so this is just a nice vantage point to see sort of this is the model that we're trying to bring to this system. And these are actually perennials growing down there. So unlike the fields outside of town that were growing wheat or corn or soy that are currently, because it's October 10th, are currently just barren soil, or they've hayed off the crop and it's sitting there with dead roots. The plants are dead in the field. Those plants are very much alive, and the soil structure and those deep 10 to 12 foot roots are still living in the soil with all the microbiome and all the life that the biodiversity goes with them. So that remains, and so it's just a nice view to see both what we're trying to create based on this model.
Very cool. I've seen both you and Wes talk about agriculture as a problem, the problem of agriculture. What do you mean when you say that?
So Wes has always described the difference between problems in agriculture and the problem of agriculture. And what that distinction is important in defining is that the problems in agriculture are the problems of nitrous runoff and soil degradation and high input costs and needing to do organic agriculture, and those sorts of things are all problems in agriculture. And the problem of agriculture is that it is annual, primarily in modern times. It is annuals grown in monoculture. That is the problem of agriculture, and that's the problem that we are trying to solve. By solving the problem of agriculture, guess what you do? You eliminate the problems in agriculture, because you've flipped the paradigm of this type of seed that you're growing and what it does by its nature, rather than creating problems in agriculture that you then have to solve in all these different ways. So that's what that means. It's great at describing that. And I think how it sometimes comes across is that farmers are the problem. And that is certainly not the intent of that, clever use of English language to describe the importance of perennial grains. Farmers they only have annual options. There's not a lot of other options. You have annuals that you can grow conventionally or you can grow organically. And in some places, growing organic is almost impossible or cost prohibitive. So it's not the farmer's fault that there's this problem of agriculture. It's our ancestors. I mean, it's not even our ancestors' fault because they didn't have another option but to breed for annuals. Now we just have a new option. We have a new option in perennials.
It's a pretty attractive option versus blaming the dead people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. We might as well solve the problem rather than blame the dead people.
Definitely. In a continually kind of changing agricultural landscape, what keeps you motivated?
The scale and the transformational potential is what keeps me motivated. I think about there's 2.7 billion acres of grain agriculture on the planet. All of that, most of that is high tillage annual monoculture production. Now on the outskirts, there's different production types, but most of that 2.7 billion acres is annual monocultures. And we have this opportunity to change the paradigm of doing gymnastics around an annual in order to try and make it perform like a natural ecosystem, to planting a crop that functions like the natural ecosystem that's been building soils over billions of years. That's one of the things that is really inspiring to me. And so, and in relation to that, we do have, I believe, and we believe, the best solution for feeding humanity if we want to do it for the next 10,000 years. And if we want that production system to function as closely as possible to natural ecosystems. It's not easy, but when I think of the perennial for the farmer, for the humans who want to eat for thousands more years, and for all of the constituents of the agroecological system that we have, perennials are like the easy button. If you have goals for ecological stability, healthy food, healthy soils, healthy clean water, and stewardship of natural resources, as well as stewardship of human resources and farming communities and rural places and subsistence farmers and all of these things, I can't find anyone who loses from the perennial paradigm shift.
What an answer. Let's get you in front of the UN and have you yell at those guys. Finally, if you could share one message with future generations about caring for the planet, what would it be?
I think it would be just remember you're an animal. And try to evolve to be intelligent, not just intellectual.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.